Welcome to the Time Bubble Podcast, the only podcast out there where the guests get to travel in time. I'm your host, Jason Ayres, and this week I'm very pleased to welcome my good friend, Mr. Sam Lowry. How are you, Sam?
Hi, Jason. I'm pretty well, thank you. Recovering from a bout of man flu over the weekend, but otherwise fine. Nice to be here.
Yes, Manfred. I thought you were going to say hay fever then, because every episode I've recorded so far has been beset by at least one of us suffering with hay fever. But I'm glad to hear that you're well. So Sam is a property developer and also a professional sailor with many years of experience working on boats, including traveling round the world, which I think we may hear about later on.
Yes, that makes me sound a lot better than a lot more exciting and interesting than I am. But yes, it's good to hear.
Excellent. Okay. Well, just to recap the format of the show, because it is a relatively new show, so we may have some new listeners. The Time Bubble podcast is based on concepts in my Time Bubble books, giving guests the opportunity to travel back in time and revisit any 3 days that they wish of their lives. We also have the opportunity to go back and fill somebody else's shoes and to visit any place in history that the guest may choose. Without further ado, let's get on. And Sam, tell me about the first day that you would like to go back to.
Right. Well, day one, in chronological order, day one would be taking me back to school. I went to an all-boys boarding school, and when I was about 14 or 15, they introduced day girls for the first time. And as you might imagine, that caused quite a lot of intrigue. And there was a very pretty, frankly, to be honest, any girl got a lot of attention, but there was a very pretty girl in my class called Leonie Potts. And she sat next to me in English, in triple English, on a Wednesday afternoon. And she was very gorgeous. And at some point during our brief school career together, she took an interest in me and used to gaze at me for an excruciating 2 hours every Wednesday afternoon. And I was, for a very long time, absolutely terrified of even looking back at her, because having been at a boys' school for many years, I was girls were a completely different species.
I can I can absolutely empathise with that, because I also was at an all-boys school, but sadly, no girls were introduced during my time there. So my experience with girls was probably even less than yours at that age. But I do recall that being 14 or 15, the whole concept of even attempting to approach a girl was quite terrifying.
Yeah, it was. And I mean, I'm sure she was very lovely, and I obviously spoke to her over time, but very little. And even though she was making it plainly obvious that she was interested in me, I was so desperately shy that I never made a play. And if I had to go back in time at that part of my life, then I think that would probably be one of the things I'd like to rectify. I'm sorry, Leonie, if you're now living with your cats at the age of 57, living with your cats, or still thinking of me, then I'm sorry. It was all my fault. But I suspect that she's gone on to greater and better things. It was very much like I don't know if you've ever seen Patang Yang Kipabang, the TV series. Though it was a TV play that was on back about that time, back in the 70s. And
I haven't, no, but I shall look it up.
It's exactly like at the time. It resonated strongly. There's a very awkward 14-year-old lad who has a female friend, and there's clearly something between them, and it's the awkward sort of teenage throes of puberty and what have you. But I then had to go through the horrors of seeing her go out with a string of my more confident mates who then treated her abysmally and then told terrible stories, which were probably in 90% of the cases not true. So unfortunately, sorry, Leonie, but yes, if I could go back in time, that's one thing that I would go back to rectify, certainly.
That does seem to be the inevitable outcome of amorous disappointments. If there is somebody that you like, certainly in my experience, they will always end up with the worst possible person just to rub your nose in. I don't think they do it deliberately. Perhaps it's fate. But when you describe that, I know you mentioned the show that you watched. It also made me think of the book High Fidelity by Nick Hornby, because certainly some of the early scenes in that were. I think there was a story where he went back to a similar sort of age, and then she went off with some really awful guy. So perhaps this is a rite of passage that we all have to go through.
I suspect so. I mean, I would be lying if I said that that's not the only regret I have in the romantic department, but it's probably the most family friendly one.
Yes.
But yes, I suspect. These things are sort of cliches and what have you for a reason, aren't they? Because we all go through them to some extent or another. Sad but true.
Indeed. One would hope eventually we would grow out of it and gain that confidence. It would be nice to, like you say, if you could go back now with that confidence and experience, it would be so different. But
yes, it's funny, isn't it? There was that song, and I've forgotten what it's called, but it's a California style, probably out in the 60s or 70s, and it's this sort of guru type, and he's talking and he's saying, one of the things is he says you're always look after your teeth. And you're never as... It's all basically truths. You're never as fat as you think you are. I disagree with that. I think you can be as fat as you think you are. But yeah, it's a and I saw Laura Southern, who's somebody I follow on Twitter, said only yesterday, your insecurities will always make you uglier than the thing you're insecure about, or less attractive. She didn't say uglier. That your insecurities will always make you less attractive than the things you're insecure about, which I thought had some sense to it. But yes. That is a 26-year-old attractive blonde girl saying that. So,
Yes, it's very difficult from our perspective. But it seems to me that as one's looks and physical condition decline, as invariably they do with age, one's mental capacity and decision making improves, and it's this classic thing that by the time you have the confidence and the persona to do something about these things, your body has let you down. So
there's never a right time, is there?
There's not. Something. There must be a perfect age, but I think somehow I missed it.
Yeah, and also I've on the weight thing. My weight all my life has gone up and down and up and down, and it's currently at an up. But and it does make a difference to your confidence, because you're aware, obviously, if you're walking around overweight. But that's never coincided with my. So there was a time when I used to drive a very nice car and I was doing quite well for myself, but I was also probably because I wasn't very happy doing it. I was somewhat large, let's put it that way. And then there's other times when I was actually having quite a hard time and I hadn't got a penny to my name and what have you, and yet I was pretty svelte and athletic. And I think it's quite nice in a way because you've always got something that's in your favour, but it would be quite nice to have overlapped the svelte athletic with the relatively wealthy sports car driving, just for a little while. That would have been nice.
You can never get them all in sync at the same time, can you?
No, unfortunately not. Not unless you're, I don't know, George Clooney or something. But
indeed,
yeah.
Excellent.
Hey-ho.
Right. Well, that's good. Let's move on to your second day. We've had your school days. Where are we going after that?
Well, right, second day. So this is more. I'm sure we've all had some of these coulda, woulda, shoulda things. I was made redundant from my job in 1992, and as part of that, I got quite a significant redundancy payout at the time, which was about £10,000, and I was a bit stuck as to what to do. So I went off and went on holiday for a month and just chilled. And then I came back feeling fairly confident that I was going to just breeze back into a job. And I don't know if you remember 1992, but it wasn't to be the case. Things
I
were a little
do.
bit.
There was a recession around that time, wasn't there?
There was indeed, yes.
Following on from the sort of late 80s house price boom. I recall because I bought my first house in 91 and it immediately plummeted in value by about a quarter, leaving me in negative equity. So that was a bad decision at the time for me.
Well, we share that because I bought a house in '89, July '89, which I think was almost the peak. But against the advice of my financial advisor, who was actually selling me the mortgage, now you think, wouldn't you, that if the guy that is making a commission selling you the mortgage is saying to you, "Are you really sure you want to do this?" You should take the hint. But at the time, there was a bubble, and everyone was just so keen to get on the ladder. Funny that these things repeat themselves. That
Yeah.
I was so desperate. I was in property as well. I was in commercial property. Anyway, so no, I did the same. I lost 25% on the house, and I actually sold it at a loss after 10 years. So, but that wasn't that was a pretty big screw up, which
Yeah.
I could have gone back to, but I've obviously tried to block that out of my memory. But with the £10,000 I got from being canned, I wasn't sure what to do, and I thought, well, I can either set up my own business, from my bedroom or whatever, or I can go a bit wild and just make an investment. I was working at the time. I was acquiring prime retail shops for Kentucky Fried Chicken. That's what I was doing when I was made redundant. So
Okay.
I thought. So I knew all of the top 100 high streets in the UK like the back of my hand. Knew them all really well. Knew where all
Yeah.
the best spots were. And in 1992, you could guarantee that the best prime pitch for every town worth being in the UK, Next occupied it with a really good shop.
Yeah.
And at the time, they were really suffering like other people, but they were particularly seemed to be suffering. And their share price was 4p. And I think it had been about £6, not £6, 60p, and it was 4p. And I thought, well, even if I mean, this is limited knowledge. Obviously, I didn't know enough about everything.
Yeah.
But I thought, well, the real estate portfolio alone, I mean, most of it's leasehold, but just the fact that they held leases on all these properties, somebody's going to buy them if they're going to go bust, just for the portfolio, surely. I mean, there's just such a fantastic portfolio. You'd never be able to acquire all those sites in one go again, to take the leases on all of those sites. Shall I put £10,000 into the shares in Next? And I ummed and ahed about it for a couple of weeks probably, and in the end I decided not to, and I started my own business, which transpired did me okay. But had I invested that £10,000 in 1992 at 4p a share, I would now be sitting on £17.5 million worth of Next shares.
Wow.
Yeah, plus the dividends over all those years as well.
It seems incredible that they could go so low, because you're quite right about the sites. I'm just thinking about Next on Cornmarket Street in Oxford, which is bang in the centre. And also, I buy a lot of clothes from them because I've always felt that they were always good quality, and they do last. And it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the stock market is a very strange thing. Whenever I have dabbled into it, I seem to have the reverse of the Midas touch. I can bring down a company just by buying some shares in it. So I found myself with redundancy and buying and selling houses with some money burning a hole in my pocket back in around 2007. And wow, did I burn through some of that? I decided to invest in the stock market seriously, and I bought into a portfolio of different companies, as they suggest you do. And
Hmm.
without fail, they it it all went horribly wrong. Because this was just before all of the crash started, so it was the worst possible time to buy in. But I recall certainly Northern Rock. Uh, I only have to say the name, and everyone remembers.
Yeah.
Was one that I put money into, and that was a few thousand, and I never saw any of that again.
Yeah. Well, I put I think it was £3,000 into Northern Rock the day before they went through, and the reason I did it, probably the same as you, I looked at it. It was because it was clear everything was going wrong, and I think at the same within the same week, the Chancellor of the three Chancellors of the Exchequer have been on Newsnight saying that if the government don't do something, cash points will be drying up within the next
Yeah,
24 hours. And I remember thinking, well, if they're saying that out loud, ex-chancellors, when they're supposedly supposed to stop panic, they must think we're on the edge, on the coast of panic here, and it's all going to go wrong. So I thought, well, Northern Rock, I'm probably the timing slightly out, but I remember thinking with Northern Rock, they're not going to let a bank go, because if they let a bank go, there'll be a rush.
yeah,
And I thought this was my logic, and probably the same as you, I guess. And
yeah.
I thought, right, so I bought £3 worth of Northern Rock shares at pennies on the pound. I can't remember what it was. And yes, the next day they let the bank go. The only bank they let go.
Yes. I think we made a mistake, which is commonly referred to in stock trading as catching a falling knife.
Right. Yes. Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I haven't really dabbled in the stock market since, and I'm not sure that I ever would again. Looking back at that time, and also if you think about after 9/11, both times the stock market effectively halved. I think if anything, some disaster befell again, and again the FTSE went down from 7,000 to 3,500, then perhaps that would be the time to do it, because I would figure at that point that either it's going to go back up or everything's going to fail anyway, so it won't matter.
Exactly. I think that's where we are, isn't it? It's got to be that kind of. Now,
Yeah,
I mean, the only thing, it's like gold. I was thinking about buying some. Well, I've got a little bit of gold, and I mean tiny amounts. I'm not talking about substantial amounts of money. But I did think, shall I buy some gold? Which is last time I looked, about 2 weeks ago, it's at an all-time high. And it's at twice what it was when it was an all-time high in 2008, or around that time. And at the same time, I bought some gold then at about $700 an ounce, and it went up to
yeah,
$1,000. I did quite well on that. And then I thought, $1,000, highest it's ever been, and I sold it. And it went up and down and up and down and up and down. And then, had I just held on to it, it would have doubled in value over the last 12 years. So, sometimes you just have to, if you're going to invest, you have to just put money away, I think, and just go, I'm confident in the long term that'll work. I'm now going to leave it there and forget about it. But you have to
yeah.
have excess. You've got to have excess cash to do that, haven't you? That's the only thing.
You have, which I've never really had, and I think
Yeah,
ultimately trying to forecast years ahead is like trying to forecast the weather 3 months from now. It
exactly.
just generally doesn't work. Okay, so let's move on to your third day. So, what have we got next?
Right. Well, this was a personal thing, and this is one I'd just like to go back and enjoy the feeling again. So it's not a regret. Um, um, as you mentioned at the beginning, I was originally in property. That was my initial first career. And I got sick of that, sold my business when I was 36, and I'm now 57. And since then, I've been sailing professionally. And I've done quite a lot of sailing in different parts of the world, probably about 250,000 miles or so.
Wow.
And yes, it seems. I remember meeting people who'd done that sort of mileage when I was first starting, and thinking, "How the hell do you do that?" But of
Yeah.
course, if you just sail a lot, it clocks up. And in July 2012, I sailed back into the Solent in the south of England after 11 months having circumnavigated around the planet on a what was a yacht race, and so early in the morning, about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, sun up, sailed a beautiful day, sailed it between the forts, past Portsmouth into the Solent, an empty Solent with a handful of boats, went past the finish line, finished gun, and left and came back into the Solent, which I'd left 11 months previously on this race. So that was quite a spectacular experience. I have to admit that amongst other men on the boat, I did actually have more than a tear in my eye at that point, because it was just...
That's amazing. So was it quite a large boat? How many of you were there on board?
So it's about 20 metres, so it's 68, 70 feet.
Okay.
There's, on average, there's about 16 of us on board. The race is split into 8 legs, so that the first leg might be, for example, from the Solent to maybe to Rio de Janeiro or somewhere like that.
Okay.
And then there's a core of the crew would stay on board that's called the Round the Worlders, and together with a professional skipper. And I was a mate, basically, so I was a professional mate. So there's a skipper and a mate, and then everyone else is amateur crew that have paid for the experience. They get trained and then off they go and do it.
Okay. So does that mean that you can go ashore at the different ports, or are you on board the whole time?
No, you stop. Well, dependent on if you've had a problem at sea. So if you've had a major issue and you're 4 or 5 days behind the rest of the fleet, then the rest of the fleet might have left, and you might have to turn up, refill the boat with food and water and what have you, and then go again. So, which is horrendous. That means you could be at sea for nearly 2 months potentially. But normally you're at sea for 3 or 4 weeks at a time. And then when you get to wherever you're going, you stop, and you get normally between 5 and 8 days in port, and probably 5 out of those 8 days are spent fixing the boat, getting more food, going on corporate days because the boats are sponsored, so you take out your corporate sponsor for the day sailing, and attending jollies. And it's actually, I did the race again a couple of times as skipper since 2011-12, and actually I would say from a skipper's perspective, life's easier at sea than it is in port, because in port there's so much pressure on you to get everything done, whereas when you're at sea there's a different kind of pressure, but you're doing, you're actually doing what you're supposed to do. So the only caveat to that is if you have a particularly bad storm, and you've got maybe 6 or 8 amateur crew who could, some of them are very good still, but there are 6 or 8 amateur crew on deck in a big storm. There's always that concern that you're going to hear, a man overboard, or somebody gets hit by something, or there's a million different ways of hurting yourself on a big yacht at sea. So that is a concern. But so when you get into port, you have a little bit of time off. You get a bit of time for beer and steak and socialising, and then you're back off on the next race. So there's 8 legs. It's about 43,000 miles, I think, in total, because the race goes back on itself. So it's about 23 to 26,000 miles to go around the world.
So that's almost a double circumnavigation.
Yes,
you have the mileage. Yeah.
Exactly. And if you were able to sail around the world on the equator, I think it's 26,000 miles from memory. But yes, if you sail south, and obviously the further south you go or the further north you go, the mileage reduces because you're sailing around a smaller part of the circle. But then we on the race that I was on, we sailed west and went back. So we sailed to Australia, then we sailed west again back towards China, and then sailed east again back towards the States. So we had quite a lot of mileage to the race. But it was the most spectacular. I didn't know I was going to do it three weeks before. I just happened to have moved out of my house and I didn't have any particular responsibilities, and I applied for the job last minute, and they said come and see us. I went to see them. They offered me the position, and they said, right, you better get your US visa because we're leaving in I think it was 2.5 weeks, and that was it. And no, I absolutely enjoyed it. Had a heck of a lot of adventures and experiences and scary moments and fun moments and teachable moments, if you like. Humanity, learning about humanity was a big thing, and yeah, finishing it for that day. Finishing was the shortest day of my life. I mean, we arrived at about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. Beautiful sunshine. We sailed with the spinnaker up with a couple of boats full of family and friends around us. Got to Cowes, dropped the spinnaker. Nearly forgot the spinnaker was up, actually. Dropped the spinnaker at Cowes. And then we grouped up with the rest of the fleet, and we motor sailed up towards Southampton, which was our Finnish port, surrounded by thousands of people, and it was just amazing. The most spectacular thing ever. Really good.
It's an amazing achievement and an amazing experience, and there are perhaps so many of us that in our whole lives we won't do anything like that for one reason or another. So fair play to you. Well done.
Well, it's opportunity, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think the thing that most people, it's saying yes to opportunities and getting it right to say no to other opportunities, and that, of course, to a large extent, is, I think, fluke, isn't it? So, but if I was just the right time, right place, said yes, and didn't regret it. So it was absolutely great fun, and very lucky to have been able to do it. So. No, I would thoroughly recommend. If you have the opportunity and you're not tied by other things which are more important in the long run, like family and stuff, then go for it. Why not?
Excellent. Right. Well, we've heard about the 3 days you'd like to go back to, and they were all very interesting. The next part of the podcast is where you get the opportunity to tell me who, past or present, you would like to go to step into their shoes for a day, and why.
Right. Okay. This was a tricky one, but probably won't surprise you that they're naval orientated.
Okay.
I decided on Shackleton, and Shackleton on the 30th of August 1916, and the reason I specify the 30th of August 1916 is that is the day that he got back to Elephant Island and rescued the remaining crew from his ship that had foundered on pack ice down in the Antarctic the year and a half, 2 years beforehand.
Oh yeah, it was stuck there for a lot. I've read about this. This is the Imperial TransAntarctic expedition. Am I right?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yes, and the great plans to do basically to cross the Antarctic. There was an awful lot to it. There were people coming from Australia doing halfway across and putting in food stations and then retreating. That's a whole other story where people were killed and all sorts of things. And then, yes, the idea was that anyone who you should read South, which is the book about this thing. I would say it is the most amazing boy's own heroic story based on failure that you will ever read. I mean, I can't recall the number of people that he took on the expedition in his band, which was the main group, but it was on Endurance, was the ship. They sailed down to South America, and they left South America and sailed south to get to Antarctica, to their base camp, so that they could cross the Antarctic. And on the way down there, they stopped at Elephant Island, which is a small island in the Antarctic, sort of just on the edge of the Antarctic belt, if you like, in the Southern Ocean. Southern Ocean, I know from experience, is an extremely inhospitable place. And they got down there, they had a chat with the whalers there, and the whalers warned them that it was a particularly bad year for ice. But they pushed on, they went south, and they got stuck in ice. That wasn't the end of the world, because they knew that, I won't tell you the whole story because it'd go forever, but it wasn't the end of the world. But they were planning for that. But unfortunately, the ice broke up the ship, so they had to abandon 2 lifeboats on the ice. They dragged the lifeboats about 600-800 miles across the ice until they got to the sea that the ice where it had broken up. They then they made up 3 boats, and they sailed across the Southern Ocean, which is just mind-boggling that they would do this in open boats. They got to Elephant Island and made the shore. This all took about 18 months to do. They got to shore, all still alive. He decided that the only way they were getting out of this, because there's nobody living on was it Elephant Island? Anyway, whatever the island they were on, they had to then they made one boat as indestructible as they could by putting a deck on it, and then he left for help, and he sailed off, and he got to I think that's when he got to Elephant Island, and he had to cross effectively the Alps of that island, which was uncharted, with two or three other men. They got to, almost dead, they got to the whaling station they'd left about 2 years previously, raised the alarm, raised another ship, courtesy of, I think, Argentina or Chile, and after 3 attempts managed to get a ship back to Elephant Island, and he made landfall on the beach and rescued the remaining men that he'd left on Elephant Island, promising to go back to on the 30th of August 1916. And the amazing thing about that whole thing is that he didn't lose one man in the entire expedition.
It seems incredible that they could survive so long. I also find it incredible that this story is not more widely known. I mean, I recall from learning about Antarctic expeditions in my youth, it's very much focused on Scott. And I recall when I was in New Zealand, I went to the Polar Exploration Museum, and again, it was very much about Scott, and that's the one that most people would probably recall more. Possibly, I think that because Scott's expedition ended in tragedy, it's perhaps a more newsworthy story. People perhaps overlook Shackleton's success in rescuing his men, whereas the story of Scott and the famous story of Captain Oates going out of the tent seems to have captured people's imagination more.
Exactly, and also not to be forgotten, First World War was just starting when they left, and they were all members of the services, and in fact offered the ship to the Lord of the Admiralty, which was Winston Churchill at the time, and Churchill said no, continue. So I think there's probably an element of, well, there's millions of people dying, in France, and what do we care about a few men down south? But I read this because I knew I was going to be talking about this. I read this yesterday. It was Apsley Cherry Garrard said something which was which I read on Wikipedia of all places, talking about Shackleton, and he said Scott for scientific method, Amundsen for speed and efficiency, but when disaster strikes and all hope is lost, get down on your knees and pray for Shackleton. I think that says it all.
Sums it up brilliantly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Amazing leader.
Indeed. Right, we've got about 5 minutes left. So finally, if you could go to any place in history, where would you go?
HMS Victory, during the Battle of Trafalgar, 21st of October 1805. There's lots of other places that would be much nicer to be.
Yes.
And I'm not saying I'd want to go there. I would like to know that it was for a day and I was going to come back again.
So if you happened to be standing next to Nelson at the wrong time and you got killed, we could spirit you back here unharmed.
That would be nice. That would be nice. I but I just think from an historical perspective, it's probably one of the key moments in British Empire, really. And there's obviously lots of good and bad moments that happened in British Empire over the years, and we're supposedly, I think too much reminded to remember all the bad bits. But it's sometimes lost that the victory. First of all, Nelson was an incredible leader and seaman of his own, and a great sort of leader and sailor. He'd already won at the Battle of the Nile. He'd had several other great victories up until that point. He was already a superstar, and what he did at the Battle of Trafalgar was amazing in terms of its ruthlessness and brutality, but also in its effect on what was at the time the modern world, which was sort of Western Europe, because he pretty much single-handedly destroyed any chance of Napoleon taking over the rest of Europe.
And most of his fleet. Am I right in believing we didn't even lose a ship of our own?
I don't know that we did lose anything. We did extremely. I mean, it was an amazing tactic, which he'd done, I think, at the Nile as well, which he sailed. I'm no great expert on this, but he sailed parallel. Because these ships can't go close to the wind, they're square riggers, so they can't sail close to the wind, which means go higher than 90 degrees to the wind, effectively. So you're limited in what you can do. So you've got to, your tactics have to be based around how you can sail your vessel and how quickly you can jibe or tack or whatever. And what he did, which was fairly unknown at the time, they used to just come along parallel to each other, the fleet, and then they just blow the hell out of each other and see who was left floating. And what he did, that's simplifying things, what he did was he sailed, I think, he split his fleet, and then they sailed perpendicular with the other fleet and went through the fleet and basically unloaded their significant firepower through the aft of the enemy ships. And they're very, you can imagine you've got thick oak on both sides, but aft you have big windows and open decks. And so he basically just destroyed the flagship, I think, in his first volley. And the way that he, just the way that Nelson led his fleet from the front, and sometimes disobeyed orders, was very brave and resolute in what he did. And of course, it's just from a British perspective, I don't think there's many British heroes that you would put above Nelson in terms of Boy's Own style heroic acts. I mean, he wasn't. I don't think he was a very nice man. Having read his biography, he was pretty bad to his wife and his children. Didn't treat them very well, or Lady Hamilton's husband. But I think from in terms of great characters, I'd have liked to have been on that deck and seen how it all played out.
Yes, it's a shame that it's so long ago we don't have any photographic evidence from the day, but I've seen lots of contemporary paintings, which whether or not they have artistic license, with the sea ablaze and smoke everywhere, and it all looks very dramatic. So,
well, there was a gale due in, so the weather would have been changing. But and also, just lastly, I have been on Victory, like most of us who've grown up in this country, and I have stood as about an 8 or 10-year-old. I've stood on the spot where he died, and I remember at the time just being blown away by that connection with history.
Excellent. Well, that's really interesting, Sam. Thank you so much for joining me today. Just before you go, if people want to look you up, I know you do podcasts and things yourself. Where can they find you?
I'm on YouTube with Vox Pop, which is there's plenty of people called Vox Pop. You might have to search me out. I'm on Twitter at Sam Lowry. Sam Lowry Esquire, actually. Sam Lowry ESQ. That's my handle. So if you want to follow me, I'm fairly verbose, as you might be able to tell.
Excellent. Okay, well, for the rest of the listeners, as you know, these episodes come out every Thursday at 8 p.m. So look out for another one next week, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube, or of course we are on Apple and all the other podcast sites as well. So that about wraps it up. Thank you very much, Sam.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks for having me on, and I think this is a cracking idea. Really nice format.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.